Just finished talking about the organic compound carbohydrates. So the next thing we're going to talk about is lipids, or you may know these better as fats. So like carbohydrates, we're going to first start with the functions of lipids. So why are fats important to us? And like carbohydrates, sometimes they get a bad rap. You think, oh, I should be eating low-fat things and I shouldn't be taking in fat at all. But that's not true. Fats have very important functions, but there is such a thing as too much of a good thing. So similar to some carbohydrates, lipids are a great energy storage. Now, if you've already done the lab, you know that there is more energy per gram of fat than there is carbohydrates or proteins. For every gram of lipids that you ingest, you're going to get 9 calories, so 9 energy molecules, so to speak. Whereas with carbohydrates and proteins, you're only getting 4 grams. So fat has a lot of calories. Now, when we think of that, we think of it as a bad thing. But if you're starving and you need calories, fats and lipids are the way to go. Another important function in fats is insulation. Think about bears or other animals that live in the Arctic or Antarctic. They typically have a very thick coat because they live somewhere where it's really cold, so they need to keep in that warmth. Well, that really thick coat is fat. They eat a lot and they put on a lot of weight in order to create this layer of insulation. So you know that it keeps animals warm in cold climates, but it also keeps animals keeps animals cool in hot climates, which kind of sounds weird. You would think that would keep them too hot. But what insulation does is it prevents the movement of heat. So one way that I illustrate this point is thinking about a house. So this is the same kind of insulation that we have for a house. So here's our house. I'm going to draw an inner layer, and let's pretend that this layer is filled with insulation. Now, when it's cold outside, we typically have it warm in our house. So here's this hot air moving around our house, going in all which directions, and it's going to try to get out. It wants to get out of the house to where it's cooler. Now, if you live in a fairly good built house, that air is not going to go anywhere. This insulation is going to block it. It's going to bounce those heat molecules back inside the house. Kind of like how greenhouse gases work. Heat's trying to leave, but greenhouse gases are pushing it back in. Well, in the summertime, more than likely you're going to have the air conditioning on, and it's going to be cooler inside of your house than outside. So now I'm just going to have these blue molecules showing really cold air inside. Like heat, it's going to be moving around trying to get outside, but that insulation stops it. It stops that cold air from leaving. So what insulation does is it prevents the movement of molecules. Molecules that are on the outside, so whether this is heat or bitter cold, are trying to get in, and what we have inside is trying to get out. So insulation is blocking it. It keeps the cold air out, the hot air out. It keeps the cold air in or the hot air in. So it's the same thing with animals. If it's cold outside, we keep in the heat, and if it's hot outside, we're keeping in our constant temperature. We're not warming up. Another function of lipids you see a lot in plants, and we talked a little bit in animals. So it's great from lubrication. So think about our skin oils. Those oils are lining all of our skin. Some areas of our body are oilier than others. Some are drier, like our hands or our elbows or our feet. But these oils act not only as a way to prevent our skin from drying out, but is kind of a first line of defense against diseases and bacteria. In plants also need lipids and need fats. Plants that are in the desert typically have a really thick leaf. Well, a lot of that leaf is actually waxes, which is a lipid. Those waxes are going to prevent water from escaping that leaf. Lots of water in these leaves, and if it's really dry outside, you really don't want to lose it. Lipids are also helpful for floating. and you're probably familiar with this. So if you think about a dolphin or a whale, they typically have blubber. So blubber is this huge fat deposits or these huge lipid deposits. Well, that actually helps them float. If you think about oil and water, if you mix oil and water together, that oil, which is a lipid, is always going to float. Well, in dolphins and in whales, that also helps with floating. Dolphins and whales need to get to the surface. They have to breathe in the air that we breathe in. So, if you have a lot of fat in you, it makes it a little bit easier to get to the surface. Another function of lipids is pretty crucial to our cell membranes. So there's cell membranes in not only our cells, which you saw with the cheek cells, but also in plants. Plants have cell walls and cell membranes. Now the major component of a cell membrane, or what the cell membrane actually is this guy right here. So I'm going to draw out an individual phospholipid, and that's the word you need to know, phospholipid. So here you have the head of the phospholipid. That head is this phospho, that phosphate. The tails are the lipids, so our fats. So you can see this layer, this cell membrane, half of it, you could even argue more than half of it, are these lipids. So these fats are crucial for us to even have cells. If we had no cell membranes, we would have no cells. Now these terms over here on the left-hand side, you can just kind of ignore those. Just know this is a phosphate head and lipid tail. And these are a major component in cell membranes in both plants and animals. Another function of lipids, and the last function that we'll talk about with lipids, are hormones. Now, typically when we think of hormones, you think of, someone acting crazy, or, a girl's on her period, so she's really irritable, or a guy is, being really mean or anything like that. That's typically what we equate hormones with. But hormones are actually any chemical messenger or any chemical signal in our body. So recall when I was talking about diabetes. Insulin is a hormone. Now, we're not going to talk much about insulin here because that's a protein, but some hormones are made from fats. Now, these hormones, the ones made from fats, are called steroid hormones. So again, steroid is referring to fats. So these are hormones that are fat-based, whereas we have other hormones that are protein-based, like insulin. So hormones occur not only in humans, but other animals, and they also occur in plants. So plants have chemical messengers that tell their cells to do certain things, just like we do. The lipid that is the major component of these hormones is cholesterol. And you've probably heard of cholesterol, and typically people are trying to lower their cholesterol. But cholesterol, like I said, is the base that is used for many different hormones. So here we have cholesterol, and here we have testosterone, a hormone that we see in males. As you can see, look at all of these rings. They are nearly identical as they are in cholesterol, because originally it was cholesterol, and then our body kind of changed it a little bit and turned it into testosterone. Cholesterol is also important in our cell membranes. So here's that cell membrane again. Here is an individual phospholipid. Recall that the top is called the head, that's the phosphate group, and the tails are the lipids. And you can also see we have some cholesterol that's kind of in between it, and it kind of helps make our cell membranes fluid. Our cells aren't rigid. It's not just a cell that keeps the same shape all the time. They move around because they need to. Think about our blood cells. If they never moved around, we would never have blood circulating our body. So we're going to talk about two major classes of hormones. particularly steroids. Now again, steroids just refers to hormones that are lipid-based, or hormones that came from cholesterol. So the first group of steroids that you should know are the anabolic steroids. And these are our sex hormones. So I'm not saying these are the ones that tell us to have sex. What these relate to is our reproductive system. So when girls have tons of hormones raging in us all the time. We have a period. That's all controlled by hormones. When we're pregnant, there's tons of hormones going through us. When both males and females go through puberty, it's lots of hormones. And all of those are related to the reproductive system. The sex hormones will also affect muscle growth and bone growth, or the word I use here is synthesis, meaning the same thing, so building muscle or building bone. So you may actually be familiar with some of these. So in females, some of the big hormones that are associated with females are estrogen and progesterone. So again, these are our sex hormones. These are the ones controlling periods and controlling pregnancy and controlling our everyday lives and when we hit puberty. For males, it's testosterone. So that's going to increase their muscle mass, especially when we think about puberty. Doesn't cycle like women's hormones do, but really important. Typically, when people such as athletes are on steroids, it's typically testosterone or some form of testosterone so they can get the benefits of that muscle synthesis. Now, the second group of steroids that you need to know are corticosteroids. So you still see steroids in it, so you know, okay, this is a cholesterol-based hormone. Cortico, well, you'll see kind of what that means. I don't have an exact function of it, but one of the examples also has cortico in it. So think of corticosteroids as kind of doing everything else in our body. So the anabolic steroids are the ones controlling anything reproductively related, and corticosteroids are dealing with just the daily maintenance of our body. So one of the things they do is they reduce swelling and inflammation. So if you get a cut or you get a bruise, sometimes it swells, those hormones will tell the body, you know what, we're done swelling, it's fine. Everything's healing now, we can reduce that swelling. Or inflammation, think of a rash is inflammation. Corticosteroids are also telling our kidneys that, hey, you know what, take out more salt, or we need to reserve water. We haven't had that much water, so we need to keep more water. Don't keep peeing it out. So these corticosteroids are making sure we have the right amount of salts and the right amount of water in our body. Now, some examples, if you've ever had a surgery, and typically you have swelling after a surgery, you may have been put on prednisone, so this middle one. So that one's a really good anti-swelling medication. Cortisone, if you've ever had a rash, typically this comes in a tube in a cream form. Another brand is called Cordaid. Again, that's a hormone that's telling the body, hey, you know what, it's okay, you don't need to be inflamed anymore. Everything's taken care of now. You're healthy now. You don't need to continue to be inflamed or to be swollen. And then another example is aldosterone. However, I do recommend when you're learning these, just learn these first two, cortisone and prednisone. So I'm going to pause there before we go into the second part of the lecture. So again, those were all of the functions of lipids, and the next talk we'll talk about the structure of lipids.